we can really do in the face. Very few things at a time, and the rest do not happen at all. The conscientious historian will correct these defects. And this opening quote comes from Herodotus. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix. So, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. Well, it's nice to be back, folks. I apologise for not being able to bring you a show last week, but I was away speaking in Philadelphia, and it was actually a really good gig in Philadelphia. This was the first Anarchadelphia, the first anarchist conference they've held in Philadelphia, and it's actually the first time the organisers had organised a conference, and I think they did very well. It was a very good event. It ran very smoothly. There were some good speakers there. And overall, a good time was had by all, and it was a pleasure to be there. So if I saw you there, then thank you for coming. And if you missed that event, do be sure to look out for it next year, because it was a great event. I'm sure it was probably live streamed as well, and there'll probably be some videos of it out eventually. I don't think that will be too far down the track. I will see some of that for sure. But at the moment, I find myself in a cheap motel in LA, getting ready for another conference next week, which is the Avatars of the Earth gathering at Mount Shasta. So if you can hear any traffic noise and stuff going on in the background, folks, it's because that's just my location at the moment. So we've had the normal bird noises and kookaburra noises and the things that we have in the background when I'm home in Australia replaced with the noise of Los Angeles traffic. And it's interesting that every time I have some time off the radio show, things seem to go pear-shaped in the world. The latest attempt at vilifying Iran is very predictable and very transparent as well. The attack on the oil plant in Saudi Arabia, folks. I mean, this was not an Iranian missile that went and blew this up. Very likely it was a Saudi Arabian missile. Or perhaps an Israeli missile, or perhaps it didn't even happen at all. Perhaps it was just a piece of drone that they used, some wreckage from the drone. Actually, it actually kind of looks like the Roswell crash all over again, folks. So who knows what it was or whether it even happened. And you've got to really look at the situation in the Gulf as well. You've got to ask yourself why Iran would attack Saudi Arabia at this time, especially with this entire US fleet poised there to stomp on it if it takes a step out of line. But you see, the United States and Israel really want to push this war with Iran, and they can't really do it. They've been attempting to kickstart this war for a few years now. We saw that ridiculous false flag attack against the oil tanker a few months ago, which they tried to blame on Iran. It was obviously not Iran. And why Iran would attack a half-empty tanker in the Gulf anyway, right when they were told not to do anything or they might get bombed. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that we see from these people. But it was a half-empty tanker. It wasn't even a tanker that looked like it was in use. So, all very predictable stuff, folks. But this is the sort of stuff they're using. Any excuse they can, any little thing they can do to point the finger at Iran is what they're doing. Anything they can think of. But as I said, Israel and the United States have been really attempting to kickstart this war, and the world just isn't going to buy it. But if Saudi Arabia does it, then the world may just step in, because the world won't want to interfere, because, this will just be two Arab nations squabbling again, because most of the world, of course, views Iran as another Arab nation, even though they're not Arabs, they're Persians. But to the West, it's just the Arabs squabbling again, and so they'll probably be more likely to accept a Saudi Arabian incursion into Iran, and then, of course, the United States and Israel will have to go in there and help their ally, than any type of US or Israeli incursion into the country. So that's why they've got Saudi Arabia to do this. And it's all very predictable, folks. And hopefully if we make enough noise about it, then it won't happen, because it is really escalating at the moment. They're really trying to ramp it up and really go in there. And hopefully if we can make enough noise about it, then it won't happen. The way we stopped a couple of other incursions in there. And the claim Saudi Arabia is making, folks, the righteous indignation they're attempting to display on television, saying, well, the drone attacked a civilian area. These were civilians who were damaged and hurt. I mean, when has Saudi Arabia cared about killing civilians? Prince Salman is a full-blown psychopath who beheads anybody who looks at him the wrong way, willy-nilly. Plus, they've been destroying children in Yemen for the last 5 years with one of the longest bombing campaigns in the history of war. And here they are saying, oh my God, they hit civilians. I mean, come on, folks. If people can't see the theatrics of this, then I really don't know what we could do to help them. But it's so ridiculous and so predictable, and such an incredible display of hypocrisy from Saudi Arabia, a nation, a heartless nation who has no problem murdering anybody it likes, claiming that it's caring about human rights and caring about civilians being damaged or injured is just ludicrous to the extreme. And the destruction this nation is inflicting upon the people of Yemen is actually unforgivable, folks. And Yemen is a beautiful country. It's an incredible country. Some amazing architecture. You know, Yemen is one of the poorest countries on earth with some of the most beautiful cities left on earth. There were cities there that people say were built by the sons of Noah. That's how old the country is. Really, really beautiful architecture, all being destroyed to rubble and bombed into obliteration by the Saudi Arabians with the full consent and support and even weapons provided for them by the Trump administration. Gotta love that one, folks. Yeah, there's Trump there attempting to make the world a better place while supporting the destruction of Yemen. Absolutely, hands down, no problem at all. And it really is absolutely disgraceful to see. And the best thing we can really do in the face of this, folks, is just spread the word to people, help people become aware of what is really happening. It really is up to us to get the word out to the people about what's going on with this whole scenario they're attempting to construct in the Middle East. And it is just another scenario, folks. More theatre for the masses, and again, all very predictable. But enough of that topic. And I wanted to continue a little bit on from the last show that I did this week and talk to you a little bit about history. On the last show that I put out, I was asking if history is a lie, how deep is the lie? And it would appear that the lie is very deep. And actually, a little apology for something that I did on last week's show or the week before last show, folks. I was talking about the mystery of some electric trams that used to run in the United States, and I inadvertently put footage of the San Francisco cable car system in there. These are not the trams that I was referring to. I'm referring to an electric tram system that existed around about the turn of the last century, and when I get back to Australia, I will dig up that footage and rectify that error. So sorry about that one. Bit of a mistake including cable car footage when I was referring to electric trams. But you get that when you're in a rush and you don't have the assistant that I've been searching for so long. I really do need to get an assistant, folks. It's very difficult to do all this on one's own. One tends to make mistakes occasionally, especially when one is getting ready for travel. But that's just the way it goes, so I'm sure you can bear with me on that one. It was really quite fascinating, folks, this electric tram system that they had in the United States. There was also a pneumatic underground rail system, like a tube system, I think was in New York. And that was prior to the 1900s, or at least around the turn of the century, the 1800s and 1900s. So all sorts of weird stuff was going on there that has been kind of expunged from our history books. You can find it if you look, but it's not there in the mainstream, not stuff that we're generally taught. But it's an interesting question, folks. You know, if history is a lie, and indeed it is, just how deep does the lie go? That's the question. A lot of people would ask the question, why? I mean, you know, why would they bother to hide history? Why would they bother to change history? I mean, it's all about what happens in the present. Who cares what happened in the past? Here we are. Let's make the best of what we got and move forward. A lot of people actually think that way. But the reason, folks, is for control. Because if you don't know where you come from, then you don't know where you're going. If you don't know what you once had, then you don't know what's been taken from you. As said by George Orwell, the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. And as said by Marcus Garvey, a man with no history is like a tree with no roots. And that is why they have stolen our history. That is why they've hidden our history, and that's why they've changed our history. And there is, as I said, folks, every evidence that it is a very, very different world to what we think it is. And it's been a very, very different process that's happened to bring us to the point that we're now at. Attempting to determine what that process was is another story. I mean, it's very difficult to know. But what we do know, what we can clearly determine simply by travelling around the world and looking at things, is that what we've been told is quite obviously untrue. The problem being, of course, in even making such a statement is that as soon as one makes such a statement, everyone else wants to know, well, if it isn't true, then what is true? And that's the question, folks, and that's what we're attempting to determine. It's a slow process, but there's a lot of people working on it, and that's a good thing. There really has been a lot of people digging down this rabbit hole lately. A lot of people have gotten wind of the fact that our past is actually very different to what we've been told, and that it's important that we find out just what happened. You know, it's important for human freedom. It's important for us to have any chance of escaping this slavery system we're living in, to at least have some inkling of how we got here. And a lot of people have been seeing the importance of it, and that's been really wonderful to see. And it's been really good to see that so many people have been respecting each other's research and collaborating and sharing and taking aspects of each other's research on. And between everybody, we're sort of starting to formulate some sort of a picture of what actually is going on here. And even in looking at all this, you know, once you start looking at the information and start going down the rabbit holes, it's very important not to start making claims along the way. Yeah, because we don't know what happened is the situation that we're in. I mean, what we do know is that we've been lied to. What we do know is that the past is different to what we've been told. And looking at some of the things we discovered, I mean, you know, even for Atlantis, we've discovered that Atlantis was everywhere. The entire Earth was populated by a completely different culture to the one we've got now, and there are traces of that culture everywhere on every continent. The buildings that we're calling Tartarian buildings are found all over the world in every country, and there's also an incredible amount of ruins that are found beneath the oceans. You know, looking for Atlantis beneath the ocean and wondering where it was, as I said, it was everywhere, because there are ruins to be found in the oceans off the coast of the United States, off the coast of Japan, off the coast of Indonesia, through the Mediterranean. I mean, everywhere, folks. There are ruins beneath the oceans all over the earth which indicate that there was a very, very large culture that was once here, and none of the destruction of these cultures is mentioned in any of our history books. And really think about this, folks. I mean, these ruins beneath the oceans are not just some random ruin somewhere. There are literally dozens upon dozens of huge ruins beneath all the oceans all over the earth. Think about that. What happened? Why isn't it in our history? We hear about little inundations here and there. We hear about Alexandria sinking beneath the waves or whatever. But what happened? Why is there so many ruins all over the earth? What happened? I mean, sure, it's not like the entire oceans are sort of paved with ruins, but it doesn't matter what ocean you go to, you'll find ruins in that ocean somewhere. That's the point. So, what happened? Why are all these ruins there? And again, why is it not in our history? Yeah, even with what we're looking at with the mud flood, what we're calling the mud flood, none of this is in our history books. The changes that happened to the maps, none of these changes are in our history books. And that's been a very interesting rabbit hole to go down as well, looking at the maps, looking at the fact that California was marked as an island around about the 1600s and then came back to being a peninsula in the 1800s. And if you go back before then, you'll find that in the 1500s it was a peninsula. And if you go back even further than that, you'll find that in the 1400s there's maps that show it as an island. So it appears that it goes from being a peninsula to being an island, and this happens every couple of hundred years according to the maps anyway. And I find that to be quite an interesting thing. There's also the fact that there's maps that show that there is land at the North Pole that we are unaware of. And that this land was removed from maps around about the early 1600s. The land appears to have changed over a period of about 100 years. Portions of it appear to have been inundated with ocean, and then the whole lot is gone by the early 1600s. I mean, whether it is actually gone or whether it was simply taken from the maps is another question. And have you ever questioned why the oceans are salt? That's something that's always struck a chord with me. You know, all the water on the earth is created through precipitation, through evaporation, through springs. Why are the oceans salt? It's an interesting question. What, from grinding down minerals for billions of years to create all the sand that we see there? Really? Is that what happened? Things we've also confirmed is the existence of free energy. the existence of buildings that produce energy, and this is pretty well confirmed, folks, because there is so much evidence of it all over the world. The pictures of buildings producing for energy, the pictures of old fireplaces which seem to have a heating plate in there and no real room to put the logs. Pictures of what look like electrical devices while there's still soldiers standing around on horseback. The depictions of people having tournaments with energy weapons, and some of the buildings that have been built by this culture, buildings that we simply cannot build today. Some of the sculptures that were done by this culture, sculptures that seem almost impossible by modern day standards, and some of the buildings are absolutely incredible. And some of the artwork was incredible. As I've mentioned to you before, the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci, we simply don't know how these paintings were done. You know, the paint on them is too thin for them to be done by any method that is currently known. And this isn't just a curious oddity. This isn't just something that's a great mystery, because that's what they do, you know. They get these things which are completely unexplainable and they just put it in the great mystery basket, and it becomes a fascination for everyone. We all look at it and go, ooh, I wonder how they did it. But it's more than that, folks. What it shows is the existence of technology that we are unaware of. Now, these paintings were not done by any method that is known to man, so how were they done? Are they photographs? Are they prints? I mean, what was it? And this is just a couple of hundred years ago. It's not like this is hidden mystery technology from way back in our distant past. This is just a couple of hundred years ago. Paintings were being constructed, pictures were being constructed by methods that we do not have today, that we are unaware of, technology that is not known to us. Very interesting stuff, folks. We've also found a lot of information regarding the existence of electric energy weapons, directed energy weapons that existed in the mid-1800s as well. These were quite widespread, quite common. The fascia that they used in World War I, or prior to World War I, what was depicted as the fascia, the axe with the bundle of sticks around it, appears as this is actually some type of energy weapon, folks. There's shows that I did about this recently, a year or two ago. There's also other people that have spoken about this as well. Martin Liedtke has spoken about it. I think John Levi has also spoken about it, and others. Speaking of John Levi, actually, I saw a video on his channel a couple of weeks ago where he was simply narrating a couple of chapters from a book. And the book was written by one of the early explorers or early settlers in the United States, and was talking about all of the incredible architecture that was found in the country, the incredible ruins, the amazing detail of some of the ruins, and some of the stuff that we've been talking about as regard to Tartaria. This has all been found in a history book, and I'll see if I can locate that video. And if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this show on YouTube, I'll be sure to put a link below in the description. We've discovered the existence of electric machine guns, electric cannons, electric weapons that changed the face of warfare according to the journals of the times. This was in the mid-1800s. And as I said, some of the sculptures that were done, sculptures done in marble, for example, the fisherman with the net, and this is all supposedly carved out of one piece of marble, and yet the net is even a different colour to the fisherman, and quite a remarkable piece of sculpture. And some of the sculptures that we see, and even some of the buildings that we see, are simply impossible to build by today's standards. Something else that we saw in World War I was the use of what appeared to be some sort of sound devices, possibly some sort of sound or frequency weapon. These are passed off to us as being acoustic locators, because there are devices that look quite similar to these that were acoustic locators, and there are devices that were acoustic locators that they used to use before radar. You know, a man would sit there with a couple of huge cones on a stand and a couple of tubes going to his ears, so he would basically extend the size of his ears so he could hear planes coming from a distance. This was radar before they had radar, folks, but some of the stuff that they've got there really doesn't look like acoustic locators. They look more like sound frequency weapons. So you've got to question what these things were as well. And the thing is, folks, when looking at all of this stuff, it all really depends on how prepared people are to think outside of the box. You know, just how prepared people are to accept the idea that history has been fabricated, and to really be able to see how easy it would have been to do this. It seems a pretty outrageous thing to be able to fabricate history. How could you teach an entire population, an entire race, an entire world a false history? How could it be done? How long would it take to do it? And this is where we start again factoring in the concept of the orphan trains and the repopulation of the world with children that appears to have happened around about the late 1800s. This is a very, very important piece of the puzzle. Because think about it, all the stuff that we know is just stuff we've read from books. We go to school, we learn this stuff, and we just take it at face value and we accept that it's true. But how do we know if any of it is actually true? What, just because it's in a book and it's taught at the school, that makes it true? We see all these monuments, we see all these ruins, we see all these things around the place, and we go and find history books, and either there's some explanation there which never quite satisfies, or there's simply no explanation. It's simply lost. It's just another one of those mysteries, something that we can't explain. And the thing is, when you find things that you can't explain, well, that's all very well, something we can't explain. But when you keep finding things you can't explain, they just begin to add up and add up and add up, and you end up with a situation where most of the stuff that we've got in the world, most of the stuff that's lying around all over the place, is stuff we can't explain. Not according to the current timeline, not according to the current academic version of history. None of it can be explained. And again, really getting to the bottom of the mystery depends on how prepared you are to think outside the box. And that doesn't mean constructing a new box for yourself by adopting belief systems along the way. It's really, really important to keep an open mind when looking at all of this stuff. Because if history is different, well, the question is just how different is it? And again, this is going to be dependent by your belief system. Is going to be determined by how prepared you are to think outside whatever box you're thinking in. And this includes our current concepts of physics and everything. If they've lied to us about one thing, just how big is the lie? How many things are they prepared to lie to us about? This is where the flat earthers get so much fuel for the fire that they're burning, folks. Because the earth is different to what we're told. That doesn't mean that it's flat, but it's certainly not what we're told. For all we know, the Earth could be 10 or 12 times bigger than what it is. Could be twice as big as what it is. Could be a huge place and we're living within a contained environment within it. Could be it's a huge place and we're simply working mining operations within one section of it. Things could be vastly different to what we're being told. This could be why it seems like it's flat to some people. How would you know? And honestly, ask yourself and be honest about it. How would you know? What, because you were told? That could be why the globe earthers and the flat earthers both have no way of solving their argument, because it could be that both arguments are in some way right. And the thing is that it's not even really about that. It's about the current state of the human condition and the fact that we are not free enough to have any of these mysteries solved. That's why I've often said, the whole concept of the truth movement is even a loaded term, because no matter what truth you're looking at, you might be looking at one particular truth and it may very well be true. But then that becomes your focus, and the same happens for somebody else who's looking at a different truth, which may well be true, but that becomes their focus as well. And then they argue about it with everybody else. And they're not looking at the overall truth because they don't know what the overall truth is, because they're not free enough to know what the overall truth is. When people think of divide and conquer, they don't really look at it on the micro scale. They don't really see how much it affects them on their daily lives and how much some of the thoughts they're having may not actually be their own thoughts, and some of the movements that they're supporting may actually be simply designed to compartmentalize them into one particular way of thinking, because all of the so-called problems that we find and all the so-called truths that we attempt to uncover are all simply symptoms of the overlying factor, the overlying problem, which is the fact that we're not free. And that's what creates all of these situations, and that's what this movement should really be about. That's why it shouldn't even be called a truth movement, because no one knows what the truth is. And as I've said so many times, in today's psychological environment, the truth seems to be pretty subjective and dependent and determined by what people want to believe the truth is. And really what this is about is freedom, and freedom is what it has always been about. And all of this arguing about what is the truth and what isn't the truth is preventing us from ever establishing freedom. And that is how the divide and conquer meme actually works over human psychology. And it's important that people see this. It's important that people recognize this, or we're never going to find a way out of this mess. It's just important that people see how much we are being played, even how much the resistance is being played. So many agents out there planting seeds of distrust. So many people out there making claims. And so many people failing to even want to consider that there may be a bigger picture to all of this. It may seem very esoteric, but I remember when I was a child, when I found out just how messed up the world was, when I realised that we had to buy land and all that sort of stuff when I was like 4 years old, one of the things that used to make me wonder was, where was the magic? Where did all the magic go? Why wasn't there magic in the world? And it's an interesting thing for a child to be thinking those thoughts, because at 4 years old I hadn't read any stories about Peter Pan or fairies in the garden or gnomes and any of that sort of stuff. I wasn't subject to any of that type of information when I was 4 years old, but I knew magic was real. And I knew there was supposed to be magic in the world, but what we would determine to be magic anyway. The question is, how would I know that at 4 years old when I was living in a very straight suburban family with a single mother and two sisters, and we were even being moved around all over the place because mum and dad were breaking up and blah, blah, blah. So we were kind of all over the place, and I wasn't subject to any of that type of information to even know what fairies or magic or any of that stuff was. I mean, we didn't have TV. TV hadn't even come to Australia when I was born. So how would I know the term magic? How would I know the magic was missing? And why would I be asking where it had gone if it wasn't something that I'd experienced before? That was one of the big things that really struck me, was when I found out that we had to buy land and I found out that we couldn't just go and live in the forest. I realised that I was living in the wrong world. I was not living in the world that I was supposed to be living in. And I used to talk to my teddy bear and ask him to please tell God to put me back onto the right world. And it was like a memory that I had. That's the thing, folks, There's even the question of whether human consciousness is recycled through this realm and what form that recycling takes. There's all sorts of stuff going on here. Like I said, folks, it just depends on how prepared people are to think outside the box that they may be thinking in. And how prepared they are to realise that a lot of the thoughts they're having are not their own. I mean, even when you try to bring this sort of stuff up to people, you get accused of New Age thinking or whatever, which is just people's religious programming. You get accused of pantheism, all sorts of stuff. Again, people's religious programming, not their own thoughts. They're not simply keeping their mind open and being willing and able to accept all possibilities in an attempt to actually find out what the truth is. They're constrained by their belief systems, and it happens in so many ways with so many topics, and that is really one of the biggest obstacles we face to ever finding out what the truth is. But again, what is it about? Is it really about truth? Are we ever going to find what the truth is without freedom? So why don't we work on establishing that? Because once we have freedom, then the truth to what actually is going on here will become self-evident. But folks, I think we've reached break time, so I better leave it there for now. We're going to have a break. Thank you for joining me on the air today. It's always a pleasure to have your company, and I'll be able to speak to you again in a few minutes. Thanks for listening. And welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen. So in looking at all of this, it's really determined by how far you are prepared to think outside the box, and as I said, by not developing another box to think within along the way. Very often we find stuff that we believe resonates with us. We adopt a belief system, and then we judge everything according to that belief system, and we shut ourselves off to other possibilities. And you've got to be open to all possibilities, you really do. And again, this is where the Flat Earth movement falls down, because they have completely locked themselves into this belief that the Earth is flat, and now everything they investigate, they look at in accordance with that belief. I mean, there could be something much vaster going on. Like I said, they could be within a small section, within a larger planet. How do you know? How would you possibly know? How would anybody know what this realm that we inhabit really is? Because all we've got to go on is the books that we're given. And as I've said, who wrote these books? Why do we take everything at face value? And you look at the government-controlled education system, folks, it hasn't really told us much truth. And so why would we expect to get the truth in any regard from any aspect of this system? And the thing is, as I've said so many times, we can look at it, we can go down these rabbit holes forever and ever and attempt to find out what's going on, but we will never find the truth because we're not free. And it's really where the system is going. That's what's important, because if we don't establish freedom soon, then we're going to pretty well lose what freedoms we have, because we're getting led into this incredibly toxic smart dystopia while we're too busy worrying about how we got here and worried about the past and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's very interesting, and we need to know how we got here. We've kind of got to juggle things and walk in both realms, because while we're investigating the past and figuring out what actually happened, we need to very much pay attention to what's going on with the future and what's going on with our present, where we're being led right now, which, as I said, is directly into this smart system dystopia, which is being rolled out in every single country, just using different methodologies, but it's happening the same in every country. Different methods, different strokes for different folks. Another question is, has it happened before? And I would suggest that it has. And if it has, then how many times has it happened? But there is every indication that this has happened before. This is just a recycling thing that's going on. When I look at the legends of the scrying mirrors and the sigils and the Lucifer system and all the stuff that's there to prepare us for these so-called end times, I think these are prophecies. I think these are left there as warnings, left there so we will recognize when things are about to change, when these events are about to come about. And again, folks, in all these questions that I pose on the radio shows, very often I get people writing to me attempting to answer some of the questions that I'm posing on the radio shows. And that isn't the reason that I do the shows or construct the shows in this way. It isn't the reason the dialogue comes out in the way it does anyway, because I don't construct the shows. But I just think it's important to encourage people to ask questions, because I am a firm believer that the truth can never be told to people. You can never tell someone the truth. They won't listen. They won't believe you. Real truth cannot be told. Real truth must be realized. People need to see that it's not that they're wrong in what they're thinking. It's just that they're perhaps not looking at a bigger picture and not seeing a broader view. So they may well be right from the perspective that they've got. No one likes to be told they're wrong. So it's important to encourage people to see that they are right in what they're looking at and the way they're thinking. It's just that there may be a bigger picture that they perhaps have not considered. And were they to do so, they may have some different views on what they're thinking. It's just encouraging them to ask the questions to begin with. That's why I structure the shows in the way that I do. That's why I'm constantly asking questions on the radio show and not attempting to present you with answers, because it doesn't matter what I may believe to be true. It doesn't matter what I think I may know, because it doesn't matter what you believe you know and whether you can convince other people to go along with what you believe you know to be true, because the truth is, how true do you know it to really be? And real truth cannot be told. It must be realized. So, you don't teach people by attempting to convince them of the truth in what you believe you know. You would by encourage them to ask the questions to begin with. And that's why I structure the shows in this way. And there are a lot of questions, folks. It's just like I said, how prepared you are to think outside the box and how prepared you are to really question things and see where the answers lie. And some of the answers may be quite bizarre, but it just, again, is determined on what you wish to believe and whether you're constrained by a belief system along the way. As once said by someone, it may have been George Santayana, it could have been someone else, but the quote goes, and I'm paraphrasing, was that when all other possibilities have been eliminated, what remains must be the truth, however improbable it seems. It's kind of an Occam's razor type of thing, but that's really the approach you have to have. And again, it is just determined by what you're prepared to believe or what you're prepared not to believe, how prepared you are to put your belief system down and think right outside the box. And having said that, considering the possibility of the world being repopulated with children, which did very much happen around about 1880, again, if you want information on that, you can search for foundlings, foundling homes, and orphan trains, and you'll find an awful lot of information that exists regarding that event. Another question is the giants that were in such abundance as recently as 100 years ago. And how big were the giants before then is the question. I mean, there's lots of pictures that we find, lots of images we see of what appear to be very large human bones that have been found. Question is, of course, how real are many of the pictures? Many of them are very likely simply photoshopped and done by people, but then you don't know. It could be a possibility that some of them are true, which is why there's been so many of them that have been photoshopped just to muddy the waters. That's the way counterintelligence works, folks. You embellish the truth to the point that it becomes non-believable. But looking at these giants, you've got to wonder how big were the people on the previous cycles. As I mentioned, I think, on the last show, what if it was determined by consciousness? What if consciousness and stature have something to do with each other? What if it's got to do with the atmospheric levels and consciousness? What if it's got to do with electromagnetism and atmospheric levels and consciousness? I mean, we don't know how it all works, but what if the size of humanity, the size of life on this earth, is gradually reduced in size every time we have what people are determining to be a reset? And whether these resets are natural or whether they're man-made, whether they're brought about by some technological force, whether they occur because of plasma events. I mean, we don't know what causes them, but the question is, do we see a reduction in stature every time one of these events happens as consciousness is further lowered? And if so, if that's the case, then how big was life on this earth once? The claim by many scientists that 99% of the life, or even more than that, 99.5% of the life that once existed on this earth is no longer here, certainly poses that question as well, because there simply isn't the land mass to contain that much life. If that much life did exist on the earth, it would have to go up. So that means that everything that did exist would have to have been a lot larger than what it is now. But when you consider this possibility, and you factor in the possibility of cyclic cataclysms and also the concept of mass extinctions and mass petrification, or at least what would be termed instantaneous petrification, because petrification doesn't take millions of years like we've been told. Petrification can take place very quickly as like 30 years, and even the electric universe guys say that petrification can take place virtually instantly in a plasma outburst. So that's another question to think of as well. What if species are destroyed and petrified and reduced in size and then further destroyed and petrified? I mean, what if the underground bases that are here on Earth are set up as some sort of a safety mechanism in order to preserve the species, because those who set them up know that these cyclic cataclysms happen? Or what if these bases are set up as some sort of an incubation process to get the life that was once here and further reduce it in size to the point that you can fit it onto a circuit board? I mean, that kind of seems to be where we're going as well. Even when you look at our cities, folks, our cities look very much like circuit boards. When you see these cities photographed from very high up, like from in space or whatever, they look like circuit boards. They look like open sores on the landscape, but they also look like circuit boards. And there was a documentary that came out recently, a couple of years ago, which I truly found to be quite fascinating. It sort of offended a lot of people, I think. They were horrified that anyone could think this way, and it was deemed to be a completely stupid concept by so many people locked into the mainstream box. But it was by a Russian guy, and it was called "There Are No Forests on the Earth." He called the video "There Are No Forests on the Flat Earth" because he wanted to attract the attention of the flat earthers to this hypothesis that he was presenting. But what he was presenting was the concept of giant silicon trees, silicon life forms that once existed here, the concept that the tabletop mountains that we see across Venezuela and across so many other places are all, in fact, tree stumps, and that we're running around in the long grass. It was a very, very interesting hypothesis. And as strange as it may seem to a lot of people, when you apply Occam's razor and you apply the type of logic that I was outlining with that quote earlier by George Santayana or whoever it was, it actually does begin to make a lot of sense. Of course, you don't want to just jump in and believe it, because confirmation bias will lead you wherever it wants to lead you, but it really does begin to make a lot of sense. It really does explain a lot of what we see on the Earth. It explains why there's so many cities beneath the ocean, all buried in water and sand. It also explains where the sand may have come from. You know, the concept that we're told by the mainstream that this was simply created via the ocean rubbing against rocks and slowly dissolving rocks over time, I mean, this is a hell of a lot of dissolving to do, folks, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And if that's what caused it, well, what's all these cities doing buried beneath it all over the place? How does that factor into any of it? But if there were giant silicon trees, such as the tabletop mounds we see in Venezuela and all over the place, I mean, there's these messes all over the Earth. If these are actually tree stumps and these trees were cut down by some sort of enormous machinery, the question is, what would the sawdust from that machinery look like? And here we have sand, which is made of silica, and very much appears to be the type of thing you would see if you were to chop down a silicon tree. I mean, this is what you'd get as sawdust, folks. It would be silica sand, exactly as we're seeing in our oceans. And I just think these are very, very interesting things to look at. Another question is, you know, a lot of the spiked mountains that we see that are so jagged, we're told that these are simply eroded by time, wind erosion and all that sort of stuff. But if they were made from wind erosion, why have they got sharp, jagged corners on them, sharp, jagged rocks? Wouldn't all of these corners have been rounded by the wind? Why do they all look the same as broken tree stumps? You know, and I know it's pretty out there thinking for a lot of people, and I'm not saying that it's true. I'm simply asking the question, is it a possibility? And when you look at it, well, yeah, it is a possibility. It just depends on how prepared you are to think outside the box. Of course, the size is what freaks people out. The sheer scale of these trees, if they were real, and the sheer scale and size of the machinery, any machinery that would have been used to cut it down. I mean, these are saw blades that virtually would have filled the sky from our perspective. The question is, you know, how big do we think we are? How big are we? Are we really as big as we think we are, or are we the little people? Are we simply like the fairies? Are we simply like Tinkerbell, only we've lost our wings and we're running around in the long grass with amnesia and we're destroying what is left of our habitat for the overlords who are hidden from view? Could that be what's going on here, folks? Just a question. But it's one that needs to be asked because, you know, we really get to a point where none of this makes sense from a human perspective. None of what we see on the world today makes sense from a human perspective, even if you look at those who control things. I mean, none of what they're doing even works for them. I mean, how much power do they think they need? And what is the power do they believe they have even? What is really going on here? Because it isn't just about all of these wars and money and all the stuff we see. This earth is being strip mined. As I said back in my film The Awakening back in 2010, the earth is being strip mined, and you've got to question where it's all going. The huge mines that we have, that we see all over the face of this earth, where are all these minerals going? I mean, do we seriously need this much stuff just to build these prefab cities that we've got, these throwaway cities which don't appear like they're built to last at all? And, you know, do we really need all this stuff just for the parts in our laptops, the components in our mobile phones, the way we're told? Does it really take a mine the size of some of the mines we see to pull out that much bauxite because you need it for microchips in phones and this sort of stuff, you know, silicon for the CPUs in computers and stuff? I mean, really, folks, none of what we are presented with as being real on this earth makes any sense at all when held up to scrutiny. And you have to question what is really going on here. And how big was the life that once existed on this earth? And as I said, it's a strange thing for people to think about. It is, you know, the most impossible thing you'd ever want to think about. Even beyond flat earth. You know, it's just something that is so out there, right out of left field for a lot of people, the concept of silicon life. But look at some of the stuff that we see. I mean, look at some of the stuff that you see in the petrified forest in Arizona. All those petrified trees that are lying all over the ground. We're told are petrified trees anyway. I mean, it's one thing for something to petrify, for something to get locked on the ground, lying on the ground, it gets covered in sediment and it turns to stone. But how does it turn to semi-precious gems? How does it turn into gemstones? How does wood ever turn into gemstones, no matter what you do to it? And who cut these things? These are all sawed, all these so-called logs lying there. Who cut them all? And I would suggest that they're not even logs, they're simply twigs, simply small branches off the much, much larger trees, which we can see the remnants of all over the place in the form of these tabletop mountains. Yeah, and again, is it true? I don't know if it's true. But it certainly makes a lot of sense when you look at things, and the possibility of it, well, the possibility is there. There's not too much else that explains the existence of these flat mountains. I don't see why a mountain would grow to be flat like that or end up being flat like that by natural means. And there's so many of them, and they're all virtually the same height, all cut off. They all look like tree stumps. It's an interesting thing. If they're not silicon tree stumps and we're not living on the floor of a mine, then I don't know where we're living, folks, because it really does make a lot of sense. Again, I'm not saying it's true, but it's certainly an interesting way to look at things. And when you start considering the possibility that we do reduce in size every time there's one of these resets, well, I don't know, you've got to wonder. You really do have to wonder. I mean, a lot of it really comes down to people's concept of size and how big they are and how big everything else is. But how big do we know we are? I mean, what are we comparing it to? What's the yardstick? All we've got to compare it to is the trees around us and the other people around us. But how do we know really what the scale of things is? You know, it's like the film Ants. I don't know whether you ever saw the film Ants, and they were just living in that little tiny pond, and they thought that was their entire world because they're just so tiny. How do we know we're not that tiny in comparison to other life forms that may exist, possibly even here on this earth, that we simply don't know about because we're kept in an enclosed area on the earth? You know, how do we know that's not true? How do we know that's not what's going on? Like I said, folks, it's just dependent on how much people are prepared to think outside the box. And when you look at it and you begin to just explore the concept, and the concept that consciousness has something to do with it, that human stature and the stature of life itself is controlled by the state of consciousness. It's just an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing to think of. You know, and you've got to ask, why is our pineal closed down? Why are we so closed down? What's the point of all the things that have been done to us? Because it's not just curious that we're in this state. It's not just interesting that we're in this state. It's incredibly significant, especially when you look at all the ancient texts and the ancient teachings which put so much emphasis on spirituality, so much emphasis on human physiology in order to obtain high levels of spirituality, i.e. the pineal gland, the brain stem, all the stuff that we see depicted in these ancient texts and these ancient statues and all of this stuff. You know, it's not just curious, folks. It's very, very significant. One of the problems, of course, is even attempting to bring this information up for discussion really offends a lot of people. You know, religious programming has a lot to do with it, unfortunately. If you think outside many people's religious boxes, they get incredibly offended. They start accusing you of being New Age or pantheism or anything else they can think of. Anything that doesn't support their book is evil, according to these people. And, you know, I would suggest that these books have been written, these religions have been created simply to separate us and hide this knowledge from us. And even when I look at the state of Europe in the Tartarian era, look at some of the old churches, look at some of the old leaders, we find depictions of Christianity and Islam working hand in hand, side by side. We find Christian leaders wearing Islamic symbols, we find Islamic leaders wearing Christian crosses. It was all the one thing. You know, all the peoples were given a different book, a different faith, but it all comes from the same place. The question is, why were they all given different ones? Why, when they all do come from the same place, what happened to separate them? You know, it's an interesting question, but ultimately it's these belief systems that continue the separation because people will simply not see the correlation between them all. And I think that they all work together, folks. I think that it's been a very, very damaging thing for the human experience, the introduction of religion over the human psyche. It really has. It causes people to sit back and view all this stuff but not do anything about it, think that someone's coming to save them. And it kind of sends people into a state of apathy. And when I say apathy, I mean a state of inaction anyway, a state of ego-based inaction, because they believe that they don't have to do anything. All they have to do is believe and they will be saved. They can allow the world to turn to hell around them. As long as they believe, they will be saved. And their mere action of doing this is one of the main contributing factors to the world actually turning to hell around them. Unfortunately, I've met a lot of Christians who are relishing the concept of the end times. They want to see the world turn to chaos. They want to see hell on earth because they believe that means that they're going to be saved. They believe that as soon as it gets so bad that it can't be handled anymore, then their Saviour is going to come and they're going to be saved. Even though they never did anything to save themselves during the whole experience, they never followed the teachings of the man they are claiming to follow. They simply waited for him to come back and do the work for them. And really, that's not what it's about, folks. If you want to get into religion, the Christ figure had a great message. And if people were to put that message into practice and behave in the way he behaved, we would change the world in a day. But I don't see anywhere where he said, don't do anything, folks, wait for me to come back and do it all for you. I don't think that was part of the plan. I think he would be horrified if he knew a religion had been constructed around his teachings. I really don't think that was what it was about at all. And I may have offended a lot of people with that, but I don't know, folks. I see religion on all sides of the fence. All religions, I see them as being hugely detrimental to the human experience, and I see them as being a huge part of the control grid. It's a part that most people are in complete denial of. Most people believe that everything's a lie, everything's been changed, all the books have been miswritten and rewritten, and everything's been hidden from us, but not this book. This book is true because this book is this book. And that's the way they are. It's an incredible thing how they can think that this one tome managed to survive the ravages of corruption simply because it is labelled as the Word of God. Do we really know that, folks? Personally, I don't think God uses a pen. I don't think God would have written anything down himself. I think that whatever is in the book is written by people, and really I think it all serves a particular agenda. And I don't think that agenda has anything to do with freedom. I really don't. I think it's been a huge part of the control mechanism, something that really keeps us down, and the world would not have been able to even achieve this amount of disrepair and been brought to the point that it has today, were it not for the introduction of religion and the apathy and inaction that comes from those belief systems that has been introduced over the human psyche. And well, folks, we have now reached that time where we've now gotten to the end of the show. They do seem to come about quite quickly when I'm talking about history. I do like this topic. And folks, thank you again to all the people who came to the Anarchadelphia gig last weekend. It was a very enjoyable gig. Next week, I will be speaking at the Avatars of the Earth Gathering in Mount Shasta. That is happening on the 26th, the 27th, and the 28th of this month, the month of September 2019. So if you're in Northern California, I'll look forward to seeing you there if you're coming. I won't be doing In the 21st century, the world is experiencing difficult times. No matter how one chooses to look at things or how much of a positive attitude one tries to adopt, there is still a great deal of uncertainty amongst most people in regards to the future, and many of those who have taken the time to investigate and who are aware of such things see the situation as hopeless, and many feel powerless in the face of the New World Order Leviathan that is ever more quickly engulfing our civilization. Yet the reality is that people are not powerless at all. In fact, quite the opposite is true, for there is a very simple and effective way to stop the New World Order in its tracks. Let's be honest about it. The system that we live under is corrupt. It's rotten to the core. It's about self-service, and it's run by psychopaths and criminals. And everyone knows it, and they get away with it, and the world continues along in this dysfunctional manner simply because we let it continue. So stop going along with it. Understand that the way to bring about real
is right. Understanding whether what you are doing is the right thing or not is not something you have to decide. It's something that you already know in your heart if you would just look and be honest with yourself. If you are doing something that you need to justify to yourself within a dialogue, then chances are that you're doing the wrong thing and are simply trying to talk yourself into allowing it. You know this. Knowledge of it is within your heart. You just have to look and you'll find it. Understand how the energy works. Be aware of the energy you are drawing into yourself, of what you are manifesting with that energy, and what type of energy you are contributing back to the energy supply for others to draw upon. This is truly how it works. Realize your potential as a human being. Forget the imaginary restraints that have been placed before you by the academic system and the limitations you are told exist by science and religious teachings, and look at the whole spectrum, because the fact is that each of these institutions functions only to compartmentalize knowledge. Each exists for the very purpose of limiting the scope of your understanding by locking you into a contained and restrictive paradigm. And until people begin to look beyond such imposed limitations, open their minds and make the connections between religion and science, they are never going to make the connections to themselves, to this reality, and to the Creator that men have called God. But to do this, and to gain a real understanding, requires both acceptance and self-responsibility. It requires that people act in a proactive manner. There are many who find such things difficult, those who would prefer someone else to come and save them. Yet such people desire the impossible, for they desire to be delivered into salvation and utopia without ever understanding the true nature of their world or even themselves. And this is very often due to the limitations of an imposed belief system. Now you can talk to those who embrace religion. You can sit them down and you can talk to them about God and about Satan, and they will converse with you eagerly, and they all very much believe in such things. But as soon as you put things like science, galactic laws, numerology, or astrotheology into the equation, many just shut off. They say it's God's will, and they sit back and they wait for Armageddon. And some will even go so far as to say the pursuit of such higher understandings is demonic. And though on a different level, it's the same with many scientists. They understand the mechanics of it all, but many refuse to add spirituality into the picture and only adhere to laws that can be applied on a mechanical level. Both approaches are inherently flawed because neither will consider the arguments of the other, and both refuse to take into account, allow for, and even embrace the true nature of feelings and emotions. Yet feeling and emotion is the key to it all. Feeling and emotion is the language that is used to create and to mold reality. Feeling and emotion is the true nature of prayer, and it is also the language by which man may communicate with the Creator. What is the true nature of that divine entity that man has named God? The Creator is the intelligence that underlies all, the fabric that permeates all realities. The Creator exists as one, a single consciousness that is in essence a duality, both male and female, the Alpha and the Omega. This is why in every religious text in which the Creator speaks, it is in the plural. This is the nature of the divine matrix, connects all things, the consciousness of which we are all expressions. As self-awareness grows and realization of one's connection to this consciousness awakens within each person, institutionalized religions seek to externalize this force and suggest that God is something external from man, a benefactor that is looking down on us. Many so-called New Age religions attempt to internalize it and suggest that God is yourself, God lies within. But both of these understandings are erroneous. Every being in creation, both you and I, and every other person in this reality, is an eternal living soul expression of God, of the consciousness of the Alpha and Omega, just as every soul is male-female in nature. Yet despite this, our world, our species, and our consciousness is today rampant with the vision and basic creation of an institutionalized society. This has been going on for a very long time, and it's spring from the last century. During this time, man as a species has been shifted so far from his center and so far away from true reality that we have almost completely lost our humanity. We have been trained to be totally dependent upon the system. We have been robbed of our will, of our self-esteem, and our independence. We have been trained to believe whatever the TV tells us and to think that image, social status, and the collecting of meaningless trinkets is the meaning of life. But most importantly, through television, the mass media, and through the ingestion of brain-inhibiting toxins such as fluoride, we have been robbed of our power to think critically and objectively. And most dangerously of all, through these same machinations, we have been robbed of our life skills. This last fact alone has placed mankind in the most vulnerable position of our entire recorded history. For at this point in time, we are, almost each and every one of us, completely dependent upon a corrupt corporate apparatus for our survival. An apparatus that places profits before people. It has nothing at all to do with the true nature of man, of our place upon. Vulnerable position of our entire recorded history. For at this point in time, we are, almost each and every one of us, completely dependent upon a corrupt corporate apparatus for our survival. An apparatus that places profits before people. It has nothing at all to do with the true nature of man, of our place upon and relationship to this earth or to each other. Yet we depend upon it for our food, for our housing, for our information, and even for our entertainment. It tells us what to do, where to go, what to look like, what to eat, how to dress, how to act, and what to think about the world and about each other. And we obey it while the world around us is raped. And if this corporate apparatus were suddenly to fail or shut down, every supermarket shelf in the world would be almost completely empty. And every resource we take for granted as being on hand for our daily lives would be depleted in a matter of just 3 days. And what then? Because if a person from almost any level of modern society was suddenly to be left alone to fend for themselves, there are very few who would be able to survive. It is of the utmost importance that mankind wake up to the reality of this and to the true situation the world is facing. Because the future we are allowing to be created, and to which we are also allowing ourselves to literally become completely enslaved to and totally dependent upon, is not going to be a future worth living in. What is required to fix it is for people to re-establish themselves as human beings and get back in touch with their humanity. Take control of your own life. Start growing your own food and take responsibility for yourself and realize and accept your connection to others. 120 years ago, a situation such as the one we are now in would have been unthinkable. So why then is it so prevalent today? It's because it has been done by design. The reason is that we have been set up. And I don't tell people this in order to scare them. I tell people simply because it is important they become aware of it, as it is a situation that can still be rectified once people become aware of the truth. Now, there are many who choose to blame different groups for this. They claim Zionism is to blame, or it's the Bilderberg Group, or it's international banksters and the money system that's the root of the problem. Yet the truth is, all of these things are merely differing mechanisms of control that are all interconnected. Certainly the money system is the head of the snake that's used to control it all, including the people. But ultimately, it's all one system, and all of these mechanisms are merely different layers of the same onion. They are differing levels in the hierarchy, and different arms of the same octopus. Both Zion Zionism and the money system and any other visibly secret organizations are merely playing their own specific part. This conspiracy runs very deep. It goes back to ancient Egypt and even beyond. Step back and just look at the bigger picture. As I've repeatedly said in other films, there is a ruling bloodline that exists on this earth. It is very old and it has always ruled the earth. It is to this bloodline that the Bavarian Illuminati appears to have allied itself with some 230 years ago. This ruling class is known by many as the Sun Cult, and there is good reason for this, as it still carries out its ritualistic worship of Amun-Ra in the world today. It does this in full view and has even hijacked other faiths to do it. Unbeknownst to the members of these religions, one purpose in doing this is to use these people to help channel the energy required to control this reality. There have been a great many people involved in this bloodline, both genetically and ideologically. And it is the upper echelons of this ancient sun cult who ultimately sit at the top and steer the ship of state. If the truth be known, there is already one world government in control of this planet. It's just that it's hidden in the shadows and governs the world through covert methods, the three most prominent of which are by controlling the flow of the world's resources, its manipulation of the global money supply, and most importantly, through the control over the flow of information. Now, archaeological evidence clearly shows us that there have indeed been civilizations as advanced as our own, and perhaps even in possession of technology that we are still yet to realize, that once existed on this planet in times long past. Archaeological evidence also clearly shows us that many thousands of years ago, the Earth suffered some kind of catastrophe. In fact, there have been several. The last one that was recorded in any discernible way was the deluge described in the Bible as the flood of Noah. The deluge did take place. It's recounted in many, many cultures, some going back even further than the Bible. It exists in Babylonian texts in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It even exists in the legends of Native Americans, of South American cultures, and even in the legends of the Australian Aboriginals, and in many other places besides. And this is not by coincidence. The deluge did in fact occur. At the time of the deluge, or possibly even in the catastrophe preceding the last one, there was indeed an advanced civilization that existed on this earth, and during one such catastrophe, technology was lost. Not just civilization, but actual hardware and important scientific records. It has been a painstaking process for those in control to regain this technology, and we have been allowed to breed in order that it may be recovered, and the control over Earth's resources is again secured by those who control this world. They have used us as the power to achieve these ends. Those who belong to this ancient cult are the keepers of the hidden knowledge. These people understand that if you can control the emotions and belief of enough of the populations, you can control the entire species and quite literally create whatever reality you desire. And they have used our energy to create the world we now inhabit. The key to addressing this situation is to understand your own potential and understand the true nature of energy, vibration, and of frequency. Everything that exists in this reality consists wholly of differing frequencies of energy. The expression of every frequency that exists as every son-daughter, and every son-daughter that exists in creation is consciousness. The Creator is consciousness, and every soul in projection in this reality is an expression of that consciousness. Consciousness through creation is universally the same and is pure Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness is the key. Once you get the picture that Christ consciousness, rather than the doctrines of institutionalized religions, is what it's all about, you understand everything about what's going on. Creation exists solely through the loving responsibility and intent of every soul in projection, every expression of the consciousness of the Creator. And this has nothing to do with institutionalized religion. Institutionalized religion has been devised by man to hide you from the truth and from the Christ consciousness that lies within you. Your inner thoughts and emotions literally affect the outer physical world around you, switch off and on at will. It's an ongoing thing. It's happening all the time. Every conscious moment of your life, you are communicating with the energy field around you. And every moment, you are quite literally shaping this physical reality with your thoughts and your emotions and the energy you are releasing through them. Many people find such information to be somewhat discomforting, because with the understanding that your inner thoughts and emotions literally affect the outer physical world around you comes a great responsibility. How will you accept this responsibility? How will you now choose to live your life in the realization and true understanding of what energies you are putting back into the matrix for others to draw upon, and of how these energies created by the choices you make are literally shaping the physical world around you? Jesus was a Christ-conscious triune being in a projection. You are a Christ-conscious triune being in a projection. A thought in the mind of God. A manifestation of the expression of Alpha and Omega. The difference is that Jesus knew it, while most other people haven't figured it out yet. Every person living within this three-dimensional reality lives a completely illusionary existence. What man considers the ordinary events of everyday life on Earth have no counterparts in the higher realms of awareness. Every person dwelling on the Earth today is a living Christ triune being, subject to the third-dimensional mentalized illusion of this material plane. On Earth, each of you has 5 lower outer senses and 105 higher or inner senses you cannot normally access. Because of this, you are only able to perceive a very narrow bandwidth of this reality. The way to unlock these higher senses is to understand the one law that governs this reality. There is only one law, and that is the law of absolute and unconditional love and service to the creation for the Creator. Evil is doing in practice the opposite of what you should be doing in principle. The reason is simple. Disharmony is the result. What is thought of as evil is, quite simply, the presence of disharmony through acting in opposition to the one law. Evil is a choice, and the so-called Battle of Armageddon that those of a religious persuasion are waiting for is, in actual fact, already being waged. It is a battle of energy that is being fought in a higher realm. It is a battle that is being fought on all levels, both spiritually and physically, and even electromagnetically. The weapons that are being used to wage this war are all around you. They are food toxins, electromagnetic radiation, and television. It is a battle of consciousness. It is being waged by occult means, and it is going on right now. The outcome of this war will be that man will either awaken his DNA, realize his true potential, and change this reality into one that embraces his connection to everyone and everything and to the Creator, or he will succumb, and in doing so, he will lose the final vestige of his humanity. We are right now on the precipice. We are teetering on the brink of one of these two realities. On one side lies salvation, and on the other, oblivion, while in our hands lies the choice. Look around you. This battle has been raging for many, many years. People are just kept distracted by design, so for the most part, they haven't yet noticed. Free yourself of the distraction, though, and it becomes very obvious and quite plain to see. We're not in the end days or even in the end hours. We are in the final minutes, and the choice of what the final outcome will be, the very key to winning, lies within each of you. All I can ask is that you each look within yourself, because when you look deep enough, you'll find that the words I've spoken are true. Realize your inner power and embrace your true potential, because the truth will set you free. My friends, stop
originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter.
Everything is energy. What you perceive with your five senses to be the solid world around you is actually nothing of the sort. It is simply differing frequencies of energy acting in harmony to form what our senses perceive as matter. The reality that we are experiencing every day and all matter within it is in fact a symphony consisting in its entirety of light and of sound. Ultimately, there is nothing else. There is only these differing vibrational frequencies of light and sound. This was expressed more than eloquently in the book The Four Agreements, in which the author Don Miguel Ruiz wrote that it is not the stars that create the light, but rather the light that creates the stars. The universe in which we live is exceedingly vast. It is fractal in nature, and this is more significant than you may at first comprehend, because recent advances in science indicate to us that this entire universe actually exists within the center of a black hole. And reality exists as above and so below. Have you ever truly looked within yourself? Does it seem significant to you that each of the 100 trillion atoms that make up each of the 53 trillion cells that in turn make up the human body is itself structured as a solar system? Each one of these atoms consists of 99.999% empty space, and yet it is these empty atoms that make up the seemingly solid world both around you and within you. Each world a realm of infinite possibility and of infinite energy, and yet one is contained within the finite space of your body, as above and so below. At the heart of each atom, as at the heart of each cell, and at the heart of every living being, lies an energy so powerful and so mysterious that it had until recently remained elusive and undefined to modern science. What is contained within this energy is consciousness, and the form that it takes is that of a black hole. This is extremely significant, because what this understanding suggests to us is that within each atom of your body there also lies yet another seemingly endless universe, and that the universe in which we live also exists within the nucleus of an atom. To truly grasp the concept and the significance of this, one needs only to realize that all that actually exists within creation is consciousness. Consciousness composed of nothing more than pure energy. Everything is energy, and everything is consciousness, because the energy itself is conscious. Each soul in projection within this reality is simply one frequency of this consciousness, and one expression of that frequency, and as above, so below. And so it continues to infinity. This information is not new. It has been known for eons, and it has been used throughout man's history. It was known and used over 10,000 years ago during the construction of the pyramids and of other ancient megalithic monuments, and it was known long before that time as well. Since that time, humanity has suffered a great forgetting, but even though this forgetting occurred, it has now become inarguably clear that mankind has been around for an extremely long time, long before any conceivable date for the planting of the first crop or the beginning of our current civilization. In fact, it is beyond any doubt whatsoever that in truth, humanity is tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, and possibly even millions of years old. To many people, it may be somewhat staggering to come to the realization that man lived perfectly well on this planet for such long periods of years prior to what is taught and what is believed by our culture. Yet evidence clearly suggests that such is indeed the case. Such evidence indicates to us that the real truth is that the entire course of human history is unthinkably different from what we find suggested to us and often presented to us as fact in our modern libraries and our history books. And it is largely due to the suppression of truth regarding such matters that we find ourselves today living within societies that are fractured and in all ways dysfunctional. Societies that are, in fact, wholly illusionary. With any real investigation, we can find, in truth, everything taught to us by our education and our religious systems is wrong. And this is most especially true when taken in regard to our significance as individuals. Through such institutions, we are taught that we are just little people. We are insignificant in the higher scheme of things. But it's a lie. Each of us quite literally holds the key to the universe in our hands, if we would just look and see it. For the reality is that we are not merely spectators here, and in truth, mankind and the overall experience that we are involved in right now on this earth is the main event. Humankind is the vector, the link between the above and the below. And we are, each of us here, participating in creation at this particular time for a specific purpose. That purpose is to create this reality, to perceive the experience, and to gather knowledge. The tools that we have been provided with in order to achieve this task are our thoughts, our feelings, and our emotions, while the most powerful tool of all is our free will. In our perception and interaction with this reality, this free will is the key we have been searching for. It is truly the most important thing of all. It is this free will that provides us with our freedom of choice. And it is this freedom of choice that controls the state of our consciousness. For whether we realize it or not, it is this freedom of choice that decides which energy we as individuals choose to center ourselves in. And it is from this chosen center that each of us perceives our individual reality. It is our individual perceptions that then, in turn, creates that which is perceived by the collective consciousness, of which we are all part. It is the choice and decisions of the collective consciousness, the free will of the people, that quite literally creates the world that we experience every day. There are now many fields of science that are also realizing a need to embrace this perspective. Indeed, many scientists are at last realizing that it is only by embracing the spiritual understanding and then applying it to science that any true answers will ever be found. For example, mainstream science is now openly declaring that consciousness is non-local to the body. And this is also extremely significant. For what this means is that what you see when you look in the mirror is not actually you. It is merely the vessel that you use as a tool to create and experience your chosen reality. For the real truth is that the world in which you live is purely illusionary. It is nothing more than a construction of your beliefs, your perceptions, and your intentions. A creation of your understanding and your conditioning. And it's these things that confuse you into believing that what you perceive in the mirror is who and what you are, and it controls what you think you can and cannot achieve. They also convince you that what you perceive and experience as the solid world around you is real, even though it is purely an illusion you are experiencing. What is required to gain an understanding of your true nature and of the power you hold on a personal level is to gain an understanding of energy and to be aware of what type of energy you are centered in. Everything that exists is simply energy in differing forms of perception. Everything is energy. It is this energy that makes up this reality. What you perceive around you as vacuum and empty space is the true stuff of the universe. What you perceive as a solid world around you, the things you perceive as matter, are in reality simply divisions in space. It is the space that is truly real. What arranges the substance of this space into discernible matter is consciousness. The conscious energy field around you has been called many things by many people. It has been called the matrix, the mind of God, nature, or even simply the field. It is the intangible stuff that connects all things and binds them into a single reality. It is this field that each of you is connected to and with which you interact to create and shape reality every moment of every day. This is achieved via your perceptions and through the interactions of your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions. But these things that occur within you are quite literally a language. And this language, though not spoken, is very real. The importance of understanding this language has been known since ancient times. Many societies of the past based their entire civilizations upon gaining this understanding. And it was solely for this purpose that many of their now ancient structures were created. Many of these ancient remains were not merely temples, they were places of learning. The key to comprehending such understand how different energies are affected by different types of geometry. A structure would be built according to certain sacred geometric principles in order to create certain frequencies within the individual. The building itself would then generate a specific type of energy field that would be perceived by anyone entering inside as a tangible feeling or emotion within them. The walls and ceilings of these places would then be adorned with information in the form of hieroglyphs, texts, and zodiac references that to the layman would simply seem like interesting stories, but to the initiated would explain the energy and the feeling generated by the structure, what this type of energy truly was, and how it could be understood, harnessed, and spoken. Each of these structures served in essence as a book, enabling the student to understand and speak the language of feeling and emotion. This language is still used and is still spoken by people in the modern world today. In fact, it is spoken every single moment of every single day by every human being on earth, though most are completely unaware that they are doing so. It is the language of electromagnetism, spoken to the surrounding energy field via the liquid crystal oscillator that powers your body. It is the language of the heart. There are, however, certain forces in this world that have worked to ensure such information is kept out of public knowledge. And this is most especially true in our modern societies, where the powers that be have painstakingly attempted to keep such knowledge well hidden. These forces have succeeded in trapping the collective consciousness of humankind within one small layer of a fractal and endless reality. And this has been achieved via the manipulation of mind. Methods have been employed that have succeeded in completely detaching human beings from their sense of power and reality. And this is a process that has been going on for a very long time. It has been done through the suppression of true knowledge and by using such machinations as religion, patriotism, race, wealth, class, and every other form of separatism available in order to create a divided mindset among the people. Anything to make humankind feel separated from each other and from the planet they live upon. And the main tool that has been used to achieve these ends is fear. The situation we are facing in the world today has been created by design, and it has become what we perceive as reality simply because most people are unaware of the true nature of reality or have any real understanding of how this world is actually run. It continues to this day due to the fact that the only information that most people receive comes from newspapers or the television. It needs to be made clear to everyone that the mainstream media will never inform people as to the real facts surrounding anything. It is simply not what the media is designed to do. The mainstream media has little or nothing to do with keeping people informed and everything to do with controlling the flow of information and shaping the thoughts, beliefs, and opinions of the populace. These institutions simply present theory and propaganda as fact and promote ridicule toward anyone questioning them. It is a very cleverly constructed system, but once you have figured out how to see through the haze of propaganda, the real truths become painfully obvious. But still, many people fail to see through the haze, and so now we find the entire human race facing a most precarious situation. The first step in remedying this situation, the first step in regaining an understanding of reality and of our true connection to it, is to free ourselves from the control mechanisms of the physical world. And the way to achieve this is for each individual on this planet to stand up and to reclaim their birthright. Do you think everything happening in the world today is normal? Do you consider the path humanity is currently treading to simply be a natural progression? Do you think the war on terror is real? Open your mind and open your eyes. Notice the continuing illegal invasions. Notice the continual removal of your rights. Notice the anti-humanitarian legislation being enacted by our governments, and understand that this situation simply cannot continue without the acceptance and passive compliance of the people. So stop complying with it, because the prison door is now swinging shut. The governments and police that we have employed to protect us have visibly stepped from their path. No longer do police act in the capacity of peace officers. Now they are simply hired thugs of governments that have long since ceased to act in the best interests of the people. And the fact that in modern times, many police officers and also many soldiers are actually brainwashed enough to unquestioningly enforce any piece of corrupt legislation handed to them rather than arresting the criminals who gave the orders indicates a grave danger to the people. This is why it is so important for public awareness of the real issues facing humanity, because with public awareness, we can quite easily turn things around and create a peaceful and empowered society. It is also why it is so important for police to wake up to themselves and start actually doing their job of protecting the citizens rather than defending elitist corruption and undermining the security of their nation, which is what they are currently doing. Unfortunately for the people, most modern police officers have forgotten that they are people too, and that the perceived power of these individuals lies in the uniform, not in the pawn that is wearing it. These police officers are removing their own rights as well, and ultimately it comes down to the people to stop this occurring. One really cannot blame the puppet leaders, or even the criminal banksters that control them, because ultimately it's all happening simply because the people are going along with it. It's all about free will. It's all about whether you choose to allow this situation to continue, or whether you choose to shake off the TV-induced apathy, spread the word, and stand up and say no. What we are experiencing in this reality is freedom of choice. So step away from the fear, because it is truly time for people to understand the real power that they have. Turn your back on the TV, shake off the fear mentality, and stand up and say no. Come to the realization that we are not numbers, we are not consumers, we are sovereign people, and the governments are our elected servants. Understand where their position in the hierarchy actually lies. The government serves the people do not serve the government. And with public awareness of the true dilemma facing humanity, we can quite peacefully and very easily rectify things. One may pause to wonder how we ever let it get this far. How do we ever let the world fall into the situation it is now in? The entire system is completely corrupt. It is corrupt in every single way. Wars are created by design. Whole nations are decimated for the sake of corporate interests. Our food is poisoned with toxins. Our water supply is filled with toxic waste under the pretext of it keeping our teeth healthy. Whole countries are brought to their knees for the sake of profit, while most people fail to even admit that there's a problem. People spend their lives in the collecting of meaningless trinkets or in self-improvement, while ignoring everything that goes on around them, believing the world is the way it's portrayed on the television, the way it looks in magazines. Many focus on the divisions among people and what they perceive to be different about others from themselves, rather than on the similarities, the essence in each of us that remains at the core, the essence that connects us to each other, the essence that makes us all the same. And people wait to ascend to a higher consciousness, or to be delivered into salvation by a Saviour, without ever having to take responsibility for themselves. And they still fail to see that there's a problem. People scoff at the idea that fluoride is a neurotoxin, and yet the world is being strip-mined and depopulated around them. Government corruption is rife, the whole system is rotten to the core, and still no one sees it as a problem. And now, with the introduction of genetically modified food and seed patenting, we are seeing a situation arise which has the potential to destroy the entire food chain on this planet. And all of this is occurring simply because we, the people, are allowing it to happen. One may pause to ask, exactly in whose interests is it to destroy the entire food chain? Why is our earth being strip-mined around us? And why is such a massive amount of depopulation occurring? One may even pause to question, who is really in charge here?
There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak. For the first time in human history, for the first time in all of human history, almost all of mankind is politically awake. And these new and old major powers face still yet another novel reality, in some respects unprecedented. And it is that while the lethality of their power is greater than ever, their capacity to impose control over the politically awakened masses of the world is at a historical low. I once put it rather pungently, and I was flattered that the British Foreign Secretary repeated this, as follows. Namely, in earlier times, it was easier to control a million people. Literally, it was easier to control a million people than physically to kill a million people. Today, it is infinitely easier to kill a million people than to control a million people. It is easier to kill than to control.
Humanity is indeed facing challenging times. There is absolutely no denying the fact of this. It is all around us. Wars, terrorism, famine, disease, corruption, homelessness, the end of the central banking pyramid scheme currently manifesting itself as the global financial crisis. Climate change the media tries to teach us is man-made, despite a wealth of scientific evidence to the contrary. And there are many other things besides. Even in this film, I've mentioned some of the challenges we are facing from the very governments and police forces we have employed to protect us. And who, through the use of a controlled media, have slowly worked to convince people that they are our rulers, when they are in fact our servants. Yet despite all the problems we face, any investigation reveals that all of these issues have a common cause, and that this cause can very easily be addressed. All that is needed to do so is public awareness of the real situation humanity is facing. In fact, when one puts away the fear, stands back, and looks deep enough, it can be seen that all of these challenges actually present mankind with a most wonderful opportunity, perhaps the greatest we have ever had offered to us. Indeed, such challenges as those we currently face may even be seen as something of a blessing, for were it not for the challenges, the opportunity we now have would never have presented itself to us. And it truly is being handed to us on a silver platter. What we have been provided with is an opportunity to embrace the power we all have. The choice to step away from the fear and to unite the human family. An opportunity for the human race to understand the connection we have to each other and to embrace a unity of consciousness. Certainly, it is extremely important that we free ourselves from the corporate shackles of this society. It is important that the social and political issues, the fake wars of contrivance, the loss of rights, and the attitude of our corrupt governments and police forces be dealt with. But what is even more important is that they be dealt with in the right way. That way is not through violence and revolution. It is not through a centre of anger and hatred. The powers that be want violent revolution. They want the polarised energy such configurations produce. But this must not be done. For the most effective way to deal with it all is through a peaceful rebellion of non-compliance to the system and through adherence to the one law, to connect to the heart and to do the right thing. Many people are waking up to this, and the more people who wake up, the more the field is charged with their energy. And so the field changes and continues to awaken more in turn as they draw new energy into themselves. And so it continues exponentially. The powers that be know this. They know the field is changing. They know that we have this opportunity to move into heart energy. They can sense how precarious their hold over this world now is, and how easily this control could slip from their grasp. This is the main reason for the current global instability and political tension, the recombinant H5N1 swine flu virus, and accompanying vaccination program. In a blatant last-ditch attempt at depopulation. And there is a reason for all of these things to have been thrust upon us at the very same time. That reason is to manipulate consciousness through the use of polarized energy by creating an atmosphere of tension, of distrust, of anger, and of fear. The Earth is reaching the end of a very long cycle. The frequency of the planet is rising, and so with it, the frequency of all upon this Earth. The harmonic frequency of the planet, known in scientific circles as the human cavity resonance, rises periodically in the predictable steps outlined in the Fibonacci sequence of numbers. The last time this occurred was close to 13,000 years ago, and it is now occurring again. The current rising frequency began in 1986 of our calendar, and this represents a very significant and extremely important time, both for this planet and also for all life that lives upon it. Evolution is a real process, but it does not happen as it is portrayed in the Darwinian model. For species do not simply turn into other species as Darwin theorized. True evolution is the evolution of consciousness. Such evolution is only a gradual process while knowledge is being acquired during each cycle. But the evolutionary changes each cycle eventually produces come as the cavity resonance rises and time speeds up at the end of each cycle. In such times, evolution comes very quickly. We are currently living in just such a time. The Earth is a conscious living being with complete awareness of itself. It is evolving, and the human race is evolving along with it. And it is not just localized to this Earth, but to this solar system, or even to this galaxy. It is universal, because it is the energy all is made from. It is consciousness itself that is evolving. Consciousness is on the verge of creating an entirely new reality, and humankind is the vector, the gateway between the above and the below. Humankind is the mind of God itself, and the choice of what the outcome of these changes will be lies with each of us. It lies within me, and it lies within you. It is a question of energy, a game of free will, a matter of choice between love and fear. Long ago, there were certain forces that gained control of this Earth, and they have worked very hard in order to never relinquish this control. These forces operate through ruling bloodlines and monetary system, and they rule the world today via the use of their favorite method, the manipulation of energy through the unbridled and relentless propagation of fear. These ruling factions know all about the great cycles this planet is subject to, about sacred geometry and energy fields. They know that this consciousness is about to evolve, and they are attempting to control that evolution. They know that all of humanity is actually a single consciousness, and they know that if they can create as much fear in the world as possible, that is the reality that will be created through this change. This is why the notion that such things like the end of the Mayan calendar signify doomsday are so heavily promoted by the media and Hollywood. The mass media and Hollywood are the tools used by the elite to influence and control the minds and the consciousness of the people. Hollywood weaves its spell by mixing truth with lies to create a distorted vision of reality and fearful visions of the future. Hollywood has always been used to do this, to influence the beliefs of the people. In fact, Hollywood has been used for this very same purpose for a very long time. Something you may not know is that in the long forgotten past, such control over human consciousness was the domain of the Druids. This sect would influence the people through ritual and the manipulation of energy fields. This was carried out by means of ceremonies that would be called magic spells and ridiculed by a modern society. The use of magic wands crafted from a particular wood that was believed to contain certain spiritual properties always figured heavily in these druidic rituals. The wood these wands were fashioned from invariably came from the holly tree. Throughout man's history, wherever mass mind control has been utilized, one will always find references to Hollywood. Changes are indeed coming to this earth. There is no way to avoid these changes. They are inevitable. Indeed, they are on our very doorstep. But these changes are nothing to fear. They are to be welcomed as a new beginning. However violent and painful they may at first appear to be. Such violence and pain is not dissimilar to the pain experienced in childbirth, for such is always the way new life appears. It is easy to promote a state of apprehension towards the coming changes. It is easy to exploit people's fear of the unknown, especially if such changes may appear at first as violent upheavals. And Hollywood does its job very well. But it is important not to view things from a fearful perspective, because the way to deal with these changes is to remain centered in your heart. Those who are centered in heart and who maintain a strong connection with the heart of this earth will easily survive what is coming to experience a new life in a very new and very different world. The universe in which we live has indeed been created by a conscious and intelligent mind, and the basis of everything within creation is that of geometry and mathematics. Everything follows the path of sacred geometry, and there is no exception to this rule anywhere within creation. It is in the orbital statistics of our solar system. It exists within plant life and nature. It even exists throughout your body. It is quite literally everywhere throughout all creation. The evolution that is about to occur is long awaited and long expected, as it follows the predictable mathematical steps outlined in the Fibonacci sequence, as does all of nature. The method used in the creation of this number sequence also holds important clues for humankind as to how these changes must be dealt with. For in the Fibonacci sequence, it is by combining the present with the past that the future presents itself. This is why it is so important for modern man to now embrace the old ways and to learn the knowledge of their ancestors. This information is well known in shamanic traditions from all cultures on all continents. For those who do not learn the old ways, the future will be strange and unpredictable. In this film, I've attempted to explain to you the real structure of this reality, the nature of energy, and of the light and sound that make up this entire universe, and everyone and everything contained within it. I've attempted to show you that this understanding is supported both by ancient traditions and also by modern science. I will say to you again now that all that actually exists within this or any other reality is pure conscious energy. That is truly all there is, and the stuff that this energy is made from is pure, unconditional love.
The only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger. And we are pitifully unaware of it. We are the origin of all coming evil.
The Earth, our home, a planet teeming with life, a place of great beauty and of great wonder. A world where ecosystem within fragile ecosystem combines to create a complex and delicately balanced web of life. A sympathetic mesh where the harmonious state of each organism is ultimately dependent upon the condition of the rest. A web in which the continued survival of each delicate strand rests entirely upon its symbiotic relationship with the environment in which it exists. Certainly the web of life has always been a fragile one, and yet for millennia it always functioned perfectly, as everything within it held its own unique place and purpose. Within this web also dwells mankind. According to ancient Vedic texts, in times long past, man too lived in complete harmony with nature, for man also held his own place and purpose within the web. And so it continued for countless years, until there appeared upon the earth a new mindset in the consciousness of humankind. And with that mindset came a new type of organism. With that mindset came civilization and a system of organised rule based deeply in social structure. How much do we truly know about the past? There are, of course, a great many books that have been written on this subject by a myriad of scholars from the modern era. But how much do we really know to be true? Many books written in modern times are simply the author's interpretation of other books written previously by other scholars. But regardless of what is written in any book, the truth is that all of the information we currently have about our past is mysterious and fragmented at best. The theories presented in history books typically offer humanity a very orderly view of the past. And because these theories are presented to mankind hypnotically in printed form, most people automatically believe these concepts to be true. Inspection. One lifts their eyes from the printed page and looks deeper into the reality of their surroundings. Quite a different picture emerges. Itself. The Oxford Dictionary describes civilization as the process by which a society or place reaches an advanced stage of social development and organisation. But how often does one ever pause to consider the questions of where civilization originally came from and how advanced it actually is? Obviously, human beings are very resourceful creatures, and human ingenuity should not be underestimated. It is certainly reasonable to assume, for example, that groups of humans would form themselves into tribes and clans, by which means all involved would benefit. But how did such groups then lead to something as entirely uncivilized and wantonly destructive as civilization as it exists today? Was it simply a natural progression? And if civilization didn't present a big enough issue, we are also presented with the question of technology. Where did it actually come from? Who was it who first pulled a rock from the ground and decided to crush it down to its component parts, isolate those parts, and refine them into metals? In fact, how is the concept of metals even known, let alone the methods that are required for the extraction and refinement of such things? Would you, if left to your own devices, ever come up with a thing like metallurgy? Would you come up with advanced science, spy satellites, or nuclear weapons? How did such inventions as these ever become part of the human psyche? But it doesn't stop at advanced technology. For in order for civilization to function efficiently, by necessity, civilization itself brought with it yet another organism, something more hidden, more mysterious and more insidious than its parent. What it brought with it was a meme. A meme is described by the Oxford English Dictionary as an element of a culture or system of behaviour passed from one individual to another by imitation or other non-genetic means. Isn't this an exact description of the system that currently controls humanity? Is it not a fact that when looking at modern civilization and the social, political, financial and legal systems that dictate the behaviour of those within it, what we observe is a system of control that is wholly fictitious? Is it not a fact that it is a system that functions entirely due to people's belief that the system itself is real? It is a system based entirely upon fear, and a system that continues to function solely due to the energy it receives from the human beings within it. Yet the system itself is simply a meme. We begin life with the world simply presenting itself to us, a reality that is open to individual interpretation. But then, at a very early age, we are taught to perceive things in a certain predetermined and socially acceptable way. The process begins first at home, where we are influenced by the beliefs, the attitudes, and the behaviour of our parents and siblings. And then, as soon as we are old enough to be capable of independent thought and have gained an acceptable degree of communication skills, we are immediately placed within a tightly controlled education system, to then begin a process where our minds are carefully and deliberately moulded into a particular way of thinking. A process where little or no deviation from conformity is tolerated. Through a system of constant repetition, we are then taught that the world functions in a certain way, and we are only considered to be functional ourselves when we believe and are able to repeat without question that which has been taught to us during our time within the system. Throughout the entirety of our scholastic years, any independent thought is frowned upon, and instilled into each and every student is the belief that our success within the system is wholly dependent upon our ability to regurgitate on command that which has been taught to us. And we are told that upon leaving the education system, our path through life and our standing in reality itself will be determined entirely upon how economically viable our personal endeavours are. We are taught that it is only through profit and through continual financial gain that our personal success will be measured. We are taught that we must either work for someone or we must strive to gain a position in society where someone else will work for us. But either way, all must work. We are essentially taught to be slaves, who will spend the majority of life in the pursuit of paper or digital credits. And through our belief that this system is real, we find ourselves living within a society that has been structured in such a way that were we not to dedicate our time to the accumulation of such things, then all that nature has provided for us, all that nature has provided freely for the benefit of all, will remain forever out of reach. Yet in pursuing such goals in the belief that doing so will enrich our lives, all we do is give power to the mean that enslaves us, and the price we ultimately pay is the connection we once had to the world around us. The price we ultimately pay is life itself. The entire educational, financial, legal, political, and social systems that modern human beings are subject to from the moment of birth are all structured with a singularity of purpose: to perpetuate the mean. These systems are designed to ensure that each individual is kept locked into a left brain understanding of the world, is kept disconnected from the reality around them, and that each individual grows into adulthood with the understanding that the meaning of life is the one with the most wins. But life is not a board game, and there is far more going on in the world around them than most people ever realise, because there is far more going on around them than that which can be perceived by the five senses. In fact, there is an entire language and an entirely different way of communicating with creation that is readily available to all. Only due to the solely left brain perception of reality that has been forced upon them since birth, most people do not even realise such things exist. And it has been so long since most of humanity accessed and used these higher senses that they have simply forgotten the language.
When you look at the brain, it's obvious that the two cerebral cortices are completely separate from one another. Our right hemisphere functions like a parallel processor, while our left hemisphere functions like a serial processor. Because they process information differently, each of our hemispheres think about different things, they care about different things, and dare I say, they have very different personalities. Our right hemisphere, it thinks in pictures, and it learns kinesthetically through the movement of our bodies. Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems, and then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, smells like, and tastes like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. I am an energy being connected to the energy all around me through the consciousness of my right hemisphere. My left hemisphere, our left hemisphere, is a very different place. Our left hemisphere thinks linearly and methodically. Our left hemisphere is all about the past, and it's all about the future. Our left hemisphere is designed to take that enormous collage of the present moment and start picking out details, and more details about those details. It then categorizes and organizes all that information, associates it with everything in the past we've ever learned, and projects into the future all of our possibilities. And our left hemisphere thinks in language. It's that ongoing brain chatter that connects me and my internal world to my external world. But perhaps most important, it's that little voice that says to me, I am. I am. And as soon as my left hemisphere says to me, I am, I become separate. I become a single, solid individual, separate from the energy flow around me and separate from you.
We have up here just an entire colony of bees creating some type of amazing magnetic force field around this tree. And this tree is transmitting whatever that is to the ground that I'm sitting on. Whatever this language is that's coming from all these insects, all these species, to and from the earth, back and forth. It's incredible, and the amount of communication that goes into it. We still, for some reason, think that we are the center of the universe, even though we try to pretend that we're not. Somehow we think that everything that happens around here, all the species, they have whatever scientific evidence that we understand. These species pollinate this, those species do this, do that, and the other. And as long as we take care of the species that we need, as long as we take care of all the ecosystems that will sustain us as humanity on this earth, then we'll be fine. Without understanding that if you were to look at it as this spherical spider web, 360 degrees, we're just a small little portion of it. And yeah, maybe a couple 100,000, maybe 1 million threads or webs would contact us. But when you branch it out and you understand that this entire web is connected to another spot, and there's 100,000 pieces that connect to that, 100,000 pieces that connect to the one down here, and overall, they're all connected in some way, shape, or form. So if you remove one because you don't think it's important enough, we seem to think it's insignificant because there's no direct impact on us. But I think that's such an illegitimate way of looking at it, because how could you say that any of this is not profound? How could you say any of it is insignificant when in the long run, it's not by a random occurrence that species grow in certain areas. It's not by a random occurrence that there are certain animal species in certain areas, certain plants in certain areas, and they all develop this massive ecosystem that feeds each other. How can we not say that specific ecosystems feed other specific ecosystems? How can we not say that the oceans are important to the deserts? How can we not say that all insects and species are important to plant life, important to mineral life? So, in a sense like that, just taking in all of these species that we see around us, taking in absolutely everything that we may not even see within that, the communication between them, we only see it from our perspective, but there has to be thousands, maybe millions, maybe infinite more methods of communication, some type of dialogue between these species and one another. And maybe we don't hear that because it's not necessary for us to. But to respect it, I think respect is one of the most important languages that we've lost, and I think love is the most important language that we've lost.
Ancient man had always had a symbiotic relationship with nature and interacted with his surroundings with a degree of understanding and communication that many people of modern times find difficult to even comprehend, let alone exercise. Yet, for most of humanity, this symbiotic relationship has now long since disappeared, and the language of nature has been all but forgotten. What happened? What was it that caused man to become so disconnected from the earth? And if civilization continues to follow its present course, how further disconnected are we likely to yet become?
as we merge with machines, and I think it's inevitable that we will transform into something new.
Transhumanism, the final frontier, or the final prison? Does it represent humanity reaching its greatest potential or facing its greatest threat? Over the last century, the people of Earth have continuously become more disconnected, both from each other and from their surroundings. And by means of a government-controlled education system, the overall IQ of humanity has degraded significantly. And this has been a quite deliberate action. But in our eagerness to embrace technology, one of the most significant problems we are facing is that if one steps back and looks a little deeper at the system we are living within, it becomes glaringly apparent that what this system is in the process of doing is seeing to the removal of virtually everything that makes humanity human, to then usher in a new era, the age of the transhuman.
Anybody who is going to be resisting this progress forward is going to be resisting evolution. And fundamentally, they will die out.
Transhumanism is the high-tech dream of both the ruling elite and of numerous modern scientists, many of whom are so locked into a left-brain mentality that they see the merging of man with machine as nothing short of inevitable. And due to the lack of any real connection to reality that many people feel in the 21st century, in modern times there are a large number of average people who are actually eager to embrace the idea.
We see kids by millions going to their doctors and their pastors nowadays saying, I don't feel anything, I don't feel human. And that's a perfect sign of the fact that individuals are no longer even able to identify with the human species anymore, because we're already in the midst of a species splitting in two, and those being still human and those others being post-human.
As attractive as the concept of simply linking your consciousness up to a mainframe and going online may be to some, human beings are complex and emotional creatures. It's what makes them human. And so the question must be asked, is this evolution? Is this what life is really about? Is this truly where humanity is destined to go?
is a human being? What makes it possible for a biological organism that is around 85% water to function as a sentient life form? Why do human beings experience reality in the manner that they do? And what effect may it have upon human beings if they were to enhance themselves with technology?
There is a very, very dark side and an occult side to transhumanism. But I believe that everybody should be able to recognize that if you look at it for what it is, transhumanism represents mankind's desire to escape the human condition. I also personally believe that transhumanism is the religion of the atheists. Much is about upgrades, physically or intellectually, but if you listen to the transhumanists, they say that eventually you'll be able to upload your soul or consciousness to a computer. And at that stage, you will basically be able to decide how you would like to live, how long you would like to live, but also the rules that would be surrounding you. Transhumanism is related to technological utopianism, a futuristic science fiction world, a belief that science and technology will shape things for the better, eventually leading to a utopia. It's an updated version of an old religion, an idea of a new heaven. If you're good, if you believe in Jesus, Allah, Vishnu, or Buddha, whoever, you will come to heaven. But much in the same way, if you believe now in science and technology, you're all going to reap the benefits of a new heaven that is going to be created right here on earth.
To our quest to better ourselves, evolving toward a state of perfection.
Everything that is experienced by a human being is interpreted by the brain as an electromagnetic impulse. Whether it be sight, or sound, or touch, or taste, or smell. All perception of these senses are merely electromagnetic signals interpreted by the brain. It can therefore be clearly seen that the human body is in fact an extremely advanced biological computer. And so the real question then becomes, what are the real implications and the real dangers of such a digitally controlled world? And ultimately, why? Why would humanity ever seek to blend something as complex, as highly advanced, and as miraculous as the human body computer with something as inorganic and limiting as a machine that has the very real potential of being controlled by an outside source?
It's not a matter of whether it's good or bad. It's going to happen. Basically, every 2 years, we can put twice as many components on a chip. And because they're closer together, they run faster, and so computers get twice as capable overall, for the same price every year. We'll make another billion-fold increase in price performance in the next 25 years. And again, shrink the size of these technologies 100,000-fold. So we went from building something that fits in your pocket in 40 years. In the next 25 years, we'll go from something that fits in your pocket to something that's the size of a blood cell.
I believe fully there will be flash memories you can plug into your brain. We'll be able to hook our brains into calculators and statistics programs and have Google directly into the frontal lobes. I mean, there's going to be a lot of expansion of the mind through interfacing the human brain with technology.
I see as a person, I'm human, and I'm really limited and restricted in what I do. So if I could come out of the singularity, being mentally and physically upgraded, yeah, I'll go for that. So I don't mind changing dramatically.
Everything that characterizes what's human and what you know and all your experiences can be uploaded into the internet and run on a computer.
In here, you can see me what I mean. I'll see you on the inside.
Who are completely identified with your ego, which is a fiction that we choose to believe in, then that's the same as believing in the constructs of a computer to be what you are.
This universe is mine.
The ego is just different cycles and programs of energy running in circles without any purpose to it other than just instant gratification. And that's post-humanity. And we're already in the thick of it.
What we have in modern times is a species with only 3% of active DNA, indoctrinated into using only one side of their brain, that exists in a debt-based society in which every single person within it is required to pay to live in what is essentially temporary accommodation, as our modern consumerist-based societies build very little that is actually designed to last. Whether they are truly aware of it or not, modern human beings live their entire adult lives in a largely unnoticed system of slavery, and this can easily be seen when one truly absorbs the implications of paper being more important than people. And now imagine this taken one step further, and having each person locked into a digital world in which it would be an easy task to permanently lock human consciousness into a completely false reality, enslaved into a state of permanent debt forever. And if you question your captors or refuse to work, if you decide you would be better off free, then what then? Transhumanism may well be presented to the world as a method of improving mankind. Yet the question must be asked, in a corporate-controlled world, exactly what constitutes an improvement? Because looking at things from a commercial and corporate perspective, what may be seen as an improvement to one class may in fact be severely detrimental to another.
The field of synthetic biology is a new frontier of science. Using nanotechnology, its goals are to improve and transcend the limits of nature. Human enhancement is being sold to us as leaping tall buildings in a single bound and having better, faster, higher intelligence, perfect health. But all of that is the sales pitch. Enhancement may in fact be degradation, our being devolved to someone else's specifications. For instance, a specimen that can work 18 hours a day, a specimen that is sterile, that will never have the responsibility of caring for others, a specimen that is even-tempered, with a narrow, predictable range of expression. All this is enhanced, improved.
We approach two paths. One is based on becoming divine by expanding our consciousness. The other path is focused on becoming God in a materialistic way, using technology. I believe both will become reality, revealing the soul of the decider. We should choose carefully.
For the first time in all of human history, mankind is politically awakened. That's a total new reality. And most people know what is generally going on in the world, and are consciously aware of global iniquities, inequalities, lack of respect, exploitation. The combination of the two, the diversified global illusion, politically awakened masses, makes a much more difficult context.
Most people at some period in their life experience what one might perhaps call a lucid moment. A moment when they look at life around them and think, is this it? And then it suddenly hits them that there must be something more, that there is something more to life. Many people instinctively know that there is a great deal more to reality than what can be perceived with the five senses. But because most people think only with their left brain, they believe that connection to these realms can only be achieved through external technology, through science. A very good example of this is the internet. People find the internet with its instant connection to others and its instant access to information to be quite natural. In fact, there are many people today who simply cannot imagine life without it. The internet, in its own sense, unites humanity as one organism, able to communicate with itself spontaneously. And this becomes more true each day as more countries and more people come online. In this growing web of communication, we can clearly see the unification of mankind becoming a reality. But it is a digital version of it. One could almost say that the internet as we know it today is the central nervous system of a new humanity. A humanity that is vastly different from anything that has previously existed. As much as it has in many ways been a huge boon to our lives, the internet has also had another, less noticeable and somewhat more disturbing effect upon people, in that among some sections of society it has created an environment of separation, most especially among the youth, as it has brought about a situation wherein many people feel far more comfortable in the virtual world provided for them by the internet than they do in the real world that exists around them. Due to this fact alone, the internet has been single-handedly responsible for a huge loss of skill. A loss of skill not only in areas of practical hands-on survival and life skills, but also in areas of social and interpersonal communication. And it is also interesting to note that people with such characteristics would indeed be those most likely to embrace the merger between man and machine.
The internet, cell phones, all these other things that they've definitely enhanced our speed of communication, but they've also done something very important, and they've severed a very crucial tie between actually talking to people, looking into their eyes when you're talking to them, getting a feel for what they're actually feeling, and just in the simple fact that now everything is based upon language. We send language through the internet, we send language through the phone, language comes across through the television, and fortunately they're able to give a couple pictures and symbols and things like that, but other than that, it's just based upon the language, and it's so disconnected from actual reality. Nobody ever stops and sits anymore, just sits inside an actual environment that is natural and just stops and listens to understand that that's reality. Because when we're talking, when we're jabbering, when we're watching something, when we're striving for something, when we're looking for this money, when we're looking for this car, when we're just going and going and going, that's nothing more than just a hamster on a wheel, just running and running and running, not really getting anywhere. And that's where the disconnect comes in. There's no nature in that anymore. We've completely divorced ourselves from nature. We are devoid of it now, because all in all, it all comes back to this little tube that sits in the corner of our room and tells us what reality is. And we sit there and we digest it and digest it and digest it until eventually we realize that this is just another form of poison. And all the poison is doing is disconnecting us.
Right in the comfort of our own home, simply by pushing a button and turning a dial.
Well, transhumanism is the next stage on from where we are now. I mean, we have what I call the body computer, this biological body computer. And because those in the shadows understand that that's what it is, and that we are like in a cosmic version of the wireless internet, you've got this kind of infinite energy field of information of various depths and various levels of awareness and expansion, and then you're decoding this bit of the band. Now, if you decode this bit of the band, which is what this body does, then that's your world, that's your everything, if you're just only aware of that. And so we have a global population that is constantly programmed to read a certain band, and then only some of that band within it. And through that, they are manipulating us to see self in the world in very minute, limited terms. When if we just opened our minds to consciousness, we would then start going further and further into the man and getting more and more insights, more and more knowledge, more and more awareness, and suddenly we'll see what's going on. And it seems to me that transhumanism is the next stage on from that, where they go the next stage into locking us into this robotic cyborg state, so that we are even beyond the limitations that we are now, to the point where basically you are born a robot, you live a robot, and you die a robot, with less and less impact on the conscious self, on perceptions, on behavior, on actions. And if we get to that point, which is what they want, this guy in Britain, a very strange man called Professor Warwick, is famous for being implanted. He's at Reading University for being implanted so he can turn freaking television on and off with his arm and all this crap. And he once said, what's the problem with loving your servitude? What is the problem with having basically technological connections which are feeding you a sense of happiness, so that you're always happy? He said this guy's an academic, and of course what he's talking about, Max, is Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, love your servitude. The idea is to create this well, I almost said part human, very little part human, certainly almost nothing part consciousness, stroke technological being, which is nothing more than a servant of a system. And not only does it serve the system, it likes serving the system because it's being fed information telling it that it's happy to serve the system. I mean, it's beyond science fiction where these people want to go, but that's where they want to go. And the only answer to it is consciousness, is to break out before we get into this cyborg, part biological computer, part technological computer. Break out of this perception control that we have now, the level we do now, before it gets into that level, because they want to move towards that very quickly.
You don't have to wonder about the singularity. See remarkable changes coming from technology. Look at today and how remarkable technology is, and it's hardly stopping.
There's an unanswered question of how far can you go and still be human.
Technology is surely a wonderful thing, but by the same token, there can be no denying that via the manipulation of what technologies are released to the public based on their ability to generate income, rather than on the true benefits they hold, then the more technology man acquires, the more disconnected from the earth he seems to become. And it must also be clearly understood that technology itself is not the problem. Technology has most certainly been of huge benefit to our society, and it is nothing to be scared of. However, it needs to be kept in balance and used as a service to mankind. But what actually is transhumanism? What does it really mean? The transhumanist dream is perhaps best summed up by Ray Kurzweil at the close of his film Transcendent Man. And as positive and beneficial as the idea is presented to the viewer as being, the underlying tone is of the gradual assimilation of all life upon the earth, and indeed the entire universe, into one huge nano-machine, whereby the universe will become intelligent as if it wasn't already, and at which point man himself will have created the machine god transhumanists believe human consciousness will ultimately become.
In the future, everything will become intelligent. Nanobots will infuse all the matter around us with information. Rocks, trees, everything will become these intelligent computers. So at that point, we can expand out into the rest of the universe. We'll be sending basically nanotechnology infused with artificial intelligence. Swarms of those will go out into the universe and basically find other matter and energy that we can then harness to expand the overall intelligence of our human-machine civilization. The universe will wake up, it will become intelligent, and that will multiply our intelligence trillions of trillions fold. We can't really fully contemplate. That's really the main reason this is called the singularity. But regardless of what you call it, it will be the universe waking up. So does God exist? Well, I would say not yet.
We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
One must truly ask, is this the direction mankind should really be heading? But even more importantly is the question of whether mankind is actually being given any choice in the matter. And if the answer is no, then the next question is how might such a thing as the global implementation of the transhumanist agenda, as outlined by Kurzweil, actually be achieved without the knowledge of the general population?
Biotech is an exploding frontier. It is clever enough and small enough to enter and change our very selves. When nanobiotech has a firm footing in us, it will be easy to upgrade and downgrade anyone and anything in any way. Oliver Curry, an evolutionist at the London School of Economics, predicted in 2007, the human race will one day split into two separate species, an attractive, intelligent, ruling elite, and an underclass of dim-witted, ugly, goblin-like creatures.
Technology is only ever as dangerous as the mind of whomever wields it. And if those who hold the reins of power in this world can in any way be appraised according to their track record, then for the bulk of mankind, transhumanism presents itself as a very dire future indeed. If it were possible to achieve the dream of people such as Ray Kurzweil and create a world where even the plants and rocks were fused with intelligent nanotechnology, how might such a thing be done? Very notably and quite obviously due to their microscopic size, the prospect of doing so without the knowledge of a vast amount of the population must be seen as utterly plausible. But how could such a mammoth undertaking be implemented? What delivery system could be employed to ensure the widest and most effective method of reaching the subject population? The phenomenon known to the alternative research community as chemtrails, and referred to by the British and United States governments as geoengineering or climate remediation, is perhaps one of the most controversial topics on the table today. Even though the practice of climate remediation is widely admitted to by governments, there are many who remain sceptical. And generally the two main questions brought up by those who are opposed to the concept are, one, if there was any truth to the idea, then why would the perpetrators be spraying themselves? And two, the phenomenal cost of such an enormous
enormous undertaking.
People say the government is up there in airplanes spraying all kinds of chemicals to change or manipulate the weather, leaving what you see there, and they call that a chemtrail.
This is of interest not just in this country, but European countries and frankly all over the world. A lot of folks interested.
We take geoengineering to mean deliberate, large-scale intervention in Earth systems. The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make very high quality, you can do this in just a jet in a very simple way. Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue.
Because nanoparticulates are potentially self-replicating, the cost of producing them is actually quite negligible. As for the question as to why the perpetrators would be spraying themselves, well, that answer is in fact a very simple one. These people want transhumanism. In fact, when one truly considers the transhumanist agenda and it begins to sink in that chemtrails seem to consist of nanoparticulates or smart dust, then the last piece of the puzzle falls snugly into place. And it is far from inconceivable that were the global population to be infused with programmable nanoparticulates, then when these tiny machines are switched on, they will simply do what they are programmed to do. And that what this may be may also be largely due to what other genetic codes have first been introduced into the host.
We have more than tripled the numbers of doses of vaccines we're giving our children in the last quarter century, up to 15 by the age of 6. Why are so many highly vaccinated children so sick?
The elites, those who can afford to carry out practices such as chemtrails, generally don't eat processed or genetically altered food. And it is extremely unlikely that they are subject to the same rigorous vaccination regime as the general public. If mankind is indeed ingesting nanoparticulates without their general knowledge, then how might such machines be controlled or switched on? In answer to this question, one only needs to realise that it is now a long-established fact that when anything occurs within the human experience, ultimately the information travels around the body electromagnetically. All our five senses, along with any emotional information, is all interpreted by the brain via these electromagnetic signals. Therefore, it is also an established fact that man can be influenced and even controlled via electromagnetism.
Metallic salts have made our air conductive. This means that we and everything around us can transmit and propagate energy. The air is no longer neutral.
I think the smart meter is a very good move for the company, just for the customer aspect. I mean, they can keep more real-time information on a day-to-day basis.
The huge awakening that has been seen in recent times leaves little doubt that mankind and consciousness itself is in a state of evolution. But there also exists compelling evidence suggesting that there are certain forces at work who wish to control the direction this evolution will take.
The second group of materials found in these environmental samples is unidentifiable fibers. And I really want you to appreciate the meaning of unidentifiable. These fibers have been sent to sophisticated laboratories, and there's nothing in the databases that match them. These are fibers, we could say, that do not exist in nature. People around the world are developing lesions on their skin that ooze and produce fibers. This is known as Morgellons syndrome. Tissue samples cultured from ordinary people without this ailment contain and grow the very same fibers. When these fibers are cultured, they produce colonies of filaments. You can see the extension filaments. And these colonies continue to grow and reproduce, branching out into more filaments and more colonies. The filament cultures can be grown from saliva samples, tissue from the skin, mucus, urine, blood, from animals and people, regardless of the presence of the Morgellons condition. So where do these fibers or filaments come from? Airborne environmental samples that were collected by Clifford Carnicom in 2000, the year 2000, gathered at high altitude on a mountain in New Mexico, showed the presence of those fibers, whose structure matches exactly the tubular filaments showing up in our blood, tissues, and skin. Additionally, the samples collected by Mr. Carnicom showed what he calls, and was called in biology, desiccated erythrocytes. This is a multisyllabic term, but it means dried red blood cells. So, why are dried red blood cells in the air?
See, nanocells are real small, 1,000 times smaller than these dust particulates. You inhale it, they go to work replicating, spreading like a virus, multiplying in exponentials. 6 months' time, I could have 100 million people converted, ditch diggers, porn stars, and presidents. Not one would be the wiser. 100 million people buy what I want them to buy, do pretty much damn well anything I figure they ought to do.
Those unidentifiable filaments, he has observed the formation of red blood cells and submicron-sized structures. So now you've got a filament making its own red blood cells. The engineered cells, the red blood, very, very tough, withstanding excesses of heat and chemicals, indicating that they are designed to endure almost anything. He has put them in a Bunsen flame, he has poured bleach on them, acid, and they still